Have you ever wondered why, despite being a decent, hard-working and dedicated man, you always end up being treated like a secondary option? Why did that woman you so admired simply disappear when she found someone better? The truth is brutal, and Carl Jung had already unraveled this mystery decades ago. There's an unconscious psychological pattern that makes women naturally see men as resources to be exploited. It's not malice, it's not conscious manipulation, it's something much deeper and more primitive. Jung discovered that behind every relationship exists an ancestral dance of power, where roles are distributed without us realizing it. And in this dance, there's an immutable law. Whoever doesn't understand their own psychological nature is destined to be used. Today, you'll discover the 8 unconscious patterns that make you become an emotional puppet, and how Jung's analytical psychology can finally free you from this trap that consumes millions of men worldwide. The predatory animus, how women's internal masculine energy devours you. Deep within every woman's psyche lives what Jung called the animus, her internal masculine energy. But here's what most men never understand. This isn't some gentle, nurturing force. It's a predatory mechanism that constantly seeks to dominate and consume masculine energy from the outside world. And guess who becomes the primary target? You. This internal masculine force operates like a vampire, feeding off your achievements, your confidence, your resources, and your emotional stability. When you first meet a woman, her animus immediately begins scanning you for weakness, testing your boundaries, and calculating how much it can extract from you without giving anything meaningful in return. The terrifying part is that women themselves are often unaware of this process. They genuinely believe they're attracted to you, that they care about you, that they want to build something together. But underneath this conscious layer, their animus is working overtime to establish dominance and control. It whispers in their ear, telling them they deserve better, that you're not enough, that they should keep looking for someone who can offer more. You've experienced this firsthand, haven't you? That woman who seemed so interested initially, who made you feel special and chosen, suddenly became cold and distant. She started comparing you to other men, questioning your decisions, undermining your confidence. That wasn't her conscious mind at work. That was her animus asserting its dominance. This predatory energy manifests in countless ways. She begins testing your reactions to see how much disrespect you'll tolerate. She creates drama to watch you scramble to fix things. She withdraws affection to see how desperately you'll chase her attention. Each time you fail these tests by being too accommodating, too understanding, too willing to sacrifice your own needs, her animus grows stronger while your masculine energy becomes weaker. The most dangerous aspect is how this process feeds on itself. The more you give, the more her animus demands. The more you try to prove your worth, the less valuable you become in her eyes. It's a psychological trap that has destroyed countless men who never understood what they were really dealing with. Your natural masculine instinct to protect and provide becomes weaponized against you. Her animus learns to trigger these instincts, making you feel responsible for her happiness, her problems, her emotional state. Before you know it, you're not living your own life anymore. You're dancing to the rhythm of her internal masculine energy, which has successfully colonized your psyche. The cruelest irony is that the stronger her animus becomes through feeding off you, the less attracted she becomes to you. She unconsciously begins to see you as weak, as beneath her, as someone who lacks the very masculine energy she's been systematically draining from you. This is why so many relationships follow the same predictable pattern: intense attraction, gradual dominance, eventual contempt. Jung understood that this wasn't personal, it's archetypal. Every woman carries this predatory animus, and every man who doesn't recognize it becomes its victim. The animus doesn't care about your feelings, your sacrifices, or your devotion. It only cares about establishing and maintaining its dominance over masculine energy. Breaking free from this dynamic requires recognizing when you're being tested and responding from a place of strength rather than accommodation. When she creates drama, you don't rush to fix it. When she withdraws affection, you don't chase. When she compares you to others, you don't try to compete. Instead, you maintain your own center, your own direction, your own standards. The moment you stop feeding her animus with your desperate attempts to please and prove yourself, something remarkable happens. The predatory energy can no longer sustain itself through you, and she's forced to confront her own psychological patterns. Some women will recognize this and begin working on balancing their internal energies. Others will simply move on to find a new source of masculine energy to consume. The feminine shadow, the dark side, they never admit. While society celebrates feminine virtues like nurturing, compassion, and emotional intelligence, there exists a darker side that women themselves often refuse to acknowledge. Jung called this the shadow, the repressed, denied aspects of personality that operate from the unconscious realm. The feminine shadow is perhaps more dangerous than its masculine counterpart because it hides behind a mask of innocence and emotional sensitivity. This shadow contains all the manipulative, controlling, and destructive impulses that contradict the idealized image of femininity. It's the part that enjoys having power over men, that takes pleasure in emotional manipulation, that feels satisfied when reducing a strong man to a begging, desperate state. But because acknowledging these impulses would shatter their self-image as the more evolved, emotionally intelligent gender, women bury these traits deep in their unconscious. The feminine shadow expresses itself through passive aggression, emotional manipulation, and psychological warfare. Unlike men, who tend to be more direct with their aggression, women have learned to weaponize emotions and relationships. They've mastered the art of making you feel guilty for having needs, selfish for setting boundaries, and cruel for not sacrificing everything for their happiness. Watch how a woman behaves when she doesn't get her way. The sweet, understanding person you thought you knew suddenly transforms into someone cold, vindictive, and calculating. She'll use your deepest fears and insecurities against you. She'll threaten to leave, give you the silent treatment, or orchestrate situations designed to make you jealous and insecure. This isn't aberrant behavior. This is the feminine shadow asserting itself. One of the most insidious aspects of this shadow is how it operates through emotional blackmail. She'll make you feel responsible for her emotional state, guilty for her tears, and obligated to fix whatever psychological wounds she claims to carry. Meanwhile, she shows little genuine concern for your emotional well-being, dismissing your struggles as weakness or immaturity. The feminine shadow also manifests through what Jung called psychological vampirism. She feeds off drama, conflict, and emotional intensity. Peace and stability actually make her uncomfortable because they don't provide the psychological stimulation her shadow craves. This is why so many relationships become cyclical patterns of conflict and reconciliation. Her shadow needs the drama to feel alive and powerful. Perhaps most disturbing is how the feminine shadow enjoys destroying men who are too good to them. There's something in this dark energy that finds virtuous, devoted men boring and contemptible. It actively seeks to corrupt, demoralize, and break down masculine integrity. The better you treat her, the more her shadow resents you for making her feel obligated to reciprocate kindness she doesn't genuinely feel. This shadow operates through what psychologists call projection. Dui. She attributes her own dark impulses to you, accusing you of being manipulative when she's the one manipulating, calling you selfish when she's the one being self-centered, claiming you don't care when she's the one showing indifference. This projection serves two purposes. It deflects attention from her own darkness while making you doubt your own perceptions and sanity. The feminine shadow also has an insatiable need for validation and attention from multiple sources. Even when she's in a committed relationship, part of her is always scanning for other options, testing her attractiveness with other men, keeping backup plans ready. She'll claim this is just friendship or harmless flirtation, but her shadow knows exactly what it's doing, maintaining a sense of power and control by keeping you insecure about your position in her life. Breaking free from the feminine shadow's influence requires seeing through the mask of innocence and recognizing the manipulation for what it is. You must stop taking responsibility for her emotional state and start holding her accountable for her behavior. When she projects her darkness onto you, you don't accept it. When she tries to manipulate you through guilt or emotional blackmail, you don't comply. The key is understanding that her shadow will test your boundaries relentlessly. It wants to see how much disrespect, manipulation, and emotional abuse you'll tolerate while still trying to win her approval. The moment you stop playing this game and start maintaining your own standards regardless of her reactions, her shadow loses its power over you. By the way, if you're curious to go even deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the Sim Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. The Savior Complex. Why you become hostage to who you should protect. Every man carries within him an ancient drive to protect and rescue those he perceives as vulnerable. This noble instinct, rooted in millions of years of evolution, becomes your greatest weakness when dealing with modern women who have learned to weaponize their apparent fragility. They present themselves as damaged, misunderstood souls in need of saving, and your masculine programming kicks in, making you believe that your love, dedication, and sacrifice can heal their wounds. But here's the brutal truth Jung discovered. Women who constantly need saving are not victims of circumstance. They are psychological predators who have learned to exploit masculine protective instincts. They create an endless cycle of crises, emotional breakdowns, and manufactured vulnerability to keep you trapped in the role of their personal savior. The moment you try to step back or focus on your own needs, they escalate the drama, making you feel guilty and responsible for their suffering. This dynamic is intoxicating for your ego because it makes you feel needed, important, and heroic. You tell yourself that she's different from other women, that she's been hurt by bad men in the past, and that your love will be the healing force that transforms her life. You become addicted to the feeling of being her knight in shining armor, the one person who truly understands her pain and can make everything better. Meanwhile, she's unconsciously learning exactly which buttons to push to keep you engaged in this exhausting dance. She times her breakdowns perfectly. Just when you're starting to pull away or focus on yourself, suddenly there's a new crisis that requires your immediate attention and support. Her job becomes stressful, her family creates drama, her health issues flare up, or her mental state deteriorates. Each time you rush back to save her, abandoning your own goals and well-being in the process. The psychological trap deepens because she never actually gets better despite all your efforts. No matter how much love, support, money, or energy you pour into her problems, new issues constantly emerge. This isn't coincidence. It's her unconscious strategy to maintain control over your attention and resources. The moment she actually becomes stable and self-sufficient, she loses her power over you, so her psyche ensures that never happens. You begin to notice a disturbing pattern. She only seems to appreciate you when you're actively solving her problems or providing emotional support during her crises. During peaceful periods, when she's feeling good, she becomes distant, critical, or starts taking you for granted. This trains you to associate her love and attention with your ability to rescue her, creating a psychological addiction that's incredibly difficult to break. The most insidious aspect of this dynamic is how it gradually erodes your own identity and life purpose. You start making decisions based on what she needs, rather than what serves your own growth and goals. Your career takes a back seat to supporting her emotional needs. Your friendships suffer because you're always dealing with her latest crisis. Your physical and mental health decline under the constant stress of being responsible for another person's psychological well-being. She becomes skilled at making you feel selfish for having your own needs or ambitions. When you try to establish boundaries or focus on your own life, she responds with accusations of abandonment, threats of self-harm, or emotional manipulation designed to pull you back into your savior role. She's learned that your masculine programming makes it nearly impossible for you to stand by while she's in apparent distress, even when that distress is manufactured or self-created. Jung understood that this pattern represents a corruption of the healthy masculine drive to protect. In traditional societies, men protected women who contributed value to their lives and communities. But modern savior complexes involve protecting women who drain value while contributing little beyond emotional drama and manufactured crises. You're not protecting someone valuable, you're enabling someone destructive. The psychological cost becomes enormous over time. You develop anxiety, depression, and a sense of learned helplessness because nothing you do ever seems to permanently solve her problems. You start questioning your own abilities and worth because despite all your efforts, she never becomes the grateful, loving partner you imagined she would become once you saved her. Breaking free requires recognizing that you cannot save someone who doesn't want to be saved, and that many women unconsciously prefer being victims because it gives them power over well-meaning men. You must learn to distinguish between someone who is temporarily struggling and needs genuine support versus someone who has made victimhood and crisis their primary strategy for controlling others. The path forward involves redirecting your protective instincts toward people and causes that deserve them, while refusing to engage with manufactured drama and emotional manipulation. When she creates a crisis, you don't rush to solve it. When she threatens to leave or harm herself, you don't negotiate or beg. Instead, you maintain your boundaries and let her face the natural consequences of her choices. The mother projection. How you become the father she never had. One of the most devastating psychological traps men fall into involves becoming a substitute parent figure for adult women who never properly resolved their childhood relationships with their fathers. Jung recognized that unresolved parental complexes create powerful unconscious forces that get projected onto romantic partners, turning what should be an equal adult relationship into a dysfunctional parent-child dynamic that slowly destroys both parties involved. When a woman has unresolved issues with her father, whether he was absent, emotionally unavailable, abusive, or simply failed to provide the security and guidance she needed, she unconsciously seeks to recreate and resolve this relationship through romantic partners. You become not her equal, but her substitute father figure, responsible for providing all the emotional, financial, and psychological support she never received during childhood. This projection happens gradually and subtly. Initially, she might seem independent and self-sufficient, but over time, you notice yourself taking on increasingly parental responsibilities. You're making decisions for her, solving her problems, managing her emotions, and providing guidance on basic life issues that most adults handle themselves. She begins treating you like a parent she can rebel against, test boundaries with, and ultimately blame for her problems and shortcomings. The insidious nature of this dynamic is that it feels good initially. Your masculine ego enjoys being needed, respected, and looked up to. You feel important and valuable when she comes to you for advice, support, and solutions to her problems. It feeds your sense of competence and authority to have someone who depends on you and treats you as the wise, capable leader in the relationship. But Jung understood that this dynamic is psychologically toxic for both parties. She never develops into a mature adult because you're constantly rescuing her from the consequences of her choices and decisions. Meanwhile, you become increasingly burdened with responsibilities that drain your energy and prevent you from pursuing your own growth and goals. The relationship becomes a one-way flow of resources from you to her, with little genuine reciprocity or partnership. The most damaging aspect is how she begins to resent you for being the strong, capable figure she claims to need. Part of her unconscious mind recognizes that this dynamic keeps her in a childlike state, and she starts blaming you for her lack of independence and personal development. She begins testing your authority, rebelling against your guidance, and creating conflict to assert her autonomy, just like a teenager rebelling against parental control. You find yourself walking on eggshells, trying to provide guidance without seeming controlling, offering support without enabling dependence, maintaining authority while avoiding conflict. It's an impossible balance because you're trying to be both a romantic partner and a parent figure, two roles that are fundamentally incompatible in a healthy adult relationship. Her emotional reactions become increasingly childlike and irrational. She has tantrums when things don't go her way, expects you to fix her mistakes without facing consequences, and demands comfort and reassurance like a child seeking parental approval. When you try to establish adult boundaries or expect mature behavior, she accuses you of being mean, unsupportive, or failing to understand her needs. The financial aspect often becomes particularly problematic. Like a parent, you find yourself responsible for her economic well-being, paying for her expenses, debts, and mistakes, while she shows little appreciation or responsibility for managing her own financial life. She develops an entitlement mentality, expecting you to provide without feeling obligated to contribute equally to the partnership. Jung recognized that this projection creates a fundamental power imbalance that destroys romantic and sexual attraction. You cannot simultaneously be someone's parent figure and their equal romantic partner. The more parental you become, the less she respects you as a man, and the more she sees you as an obligation rather than a choice. The relationship becomes transactional rather than passionate, based on dependency rather than mutual attraction and respect. The psychological burden on you becomes enormous. You're responsible not just for your own life and goals, but for another adult's complete well-being and development. You sacrifice your own growth to manage her problems, your own dreams to fund her lifestyle, your own emotional needs to provide constant support and validation for hers. Breaking free from this projection requires recognizing when you're being cast in a parental role and refusing to accept that responsibility. You must stop solving her problems, making decisions for her, and rescuing her from the consequences of her choices. When she comes to you with problems, you offer emotional support, but don't provide solutions. When she makes poor decisions, you don't clean up the mess or shield her from the results. The key is maintaining your position as an equal adult partner rather than a substitute parent. You have your own life, goals, and priorities that take precedence over managing her emotional and practical needs. If she wants a father figure, she needs to work through those issues with a therapist, not turn her romantic partner into a replacement parent who sacrifices his own life for her psychological healing. The provider archetype, the ancestral trap that binds you. Buried deep in your masculine DNA lies an ancient programming that once ensured human survival, the drive to provide resources, protection, and security for women and children. For thousands of years, this instinct served our species well, creating stable family units where men hunted, gathered, and defended, while women nurtured and maintained the home. But in today's world, this same programming has become a psychological prison that modern women exploit to drain your resources while offering nothing meaningful in return. Your provider instinct activates automatically when you encounter a woman you find attractive. Without conscious thought, you begin calculating how you can demonstrate your ability to take care of her needs. You start paying for dates, buying gifts, covering her expenses, and gradually taking on financial responsibilities that should be shared equally in a modern partnership. This feels natural and right because it aligns with your deepest biological programming, but you're actually walking into a carefully constructed trap. Modern women have learned to trigger your provider instincts while simultaneously rejecting the traditional feminine roles that once balanced this dynamic. They want the financial benefits of your masculine drive to provide, but they refuse to offer the loyalty, dedication, domestic partnership, and exclusive sexual access that women historically provided in exchange for male resources. You end up giving everything while receiving little more than temporary companionship and occasional physical intimacy. The psychological manipulation begins subtly. She doesn't directly demand that you pay for everything, but she creates situations where your provider programming kicks in automatically. She mentions financial stress, talks about expensive items she wants, or creates scenarios where paying becomes the socially expected masculine response. Your brain interprets these signals as opportunities to demonstrate your value and worthiness as a potential partner. What you don't realize is that each time you provide without receiving equal value in return, you're training her to see you as a resource rather than a person. She begins associating your presence with financial benefit and comfort, while gradually losing respect for you as an individual with your own needs and desires. The more you give, the more entitled she becomes, and the less she appreciates your sacrifices. This dynamic becomes particularly toxic because it creates a false sense of security and commitment. You believe that by providing for her needs, you're building a foundation for a lasting relationship where she'll eventually reciprocate your investment. But Jung understood that relationships based on resource exchange rather than genuine mutual attraction and respect are inherently unstable and unsatisfying for both parties. Your provider programming also makes you vulnerable to manipulation through scarcity and competition. She learns to mention other men who are interested in her, creating artificial competition that triggers your instinct to provide more resources to secure her exclusive attention. You find yourself in bidding wars with phantom competitors, constantly escalating your financial investments to maintain your position in her life. The most destructive aspect is how this pattern prevents you from developing your own life and pursuing your own goals. Your energy becomes focused on generating resources for her consumption rather than building wealth and success for your own benefit. You sacrifice career opportunities, personal interests, and long-term financial security to maintain her lifestyle and keep her satisfied in the short term. She never develops genuine appreciation for your sacrifices because she begins seeing your provision as an entitlement rather than a gift. When you provide consistently, it becomes the expected baseline rather than something special deserving gratitude. When you occasionally can't provide or choose to focus resources on yourself, she reacts with disappointment, anger, or threats to find someone who will better serve her financial needs. Jung recognized that this imbalance creates resentment on both sides. You become bitter about constantly giving without receiving equal investment, while she becomes contemptuous of your willingness to sacrifice your own interests for her comfort. Neither party respects the other. You see her as selfish and entitled, while she sees you as weak and desperate for approval. The provider trap also prevents authentic attraction from developing. Women are naturally drawn to men who have resources but aren't desperate to share them, who are generous by choice rather than compulsion. When you provide automatically and consistently, you signal that your resources have low value and that you have abundant time and money with nothing better to do than serve her needs. Breaking free requires recognizing that your provider instincts, while natural and historically valuable, are being exploited in modern dating dynamics. You must learn to provide strategically rather than automatically, ensuring that your investments are matched by equal contributions from her side. This doesn't mean being stingy or calculating every expense, but rather maintaining awareness of the balance between giving and receiving. The key is redirecting your provider energy toward building your own wealth, status, and security first. When you have abundance that genuinely overflows into generosity rather than sacrifice, your provision becomes attractive rather than desperate. Women respect men who choose to share their success rather than men who sacrifice their potential for female approval. You must also learn to recognize and resist manipulation tactics designed to trigger your provider programming. When she creates financial emergencies, mentions other men's generosity, or suggests that providing is how you prove your feelings, you maintain your boundaries and make decisions based on your own values rather than her implied expectations. The false persona, how they create masks to control you. Jung discovered that every person presents a carefully constructed mask to the world, what he called the persona, designed to create specific impressions and achieve desired outcomes. But women have elevated this psychological mechanism to an art form, creating elaborate false personalities specifically designed to trigger your deepest desires and vulnerabilities. The woman you think you're falling for often doesn't exist. She's a carefully crafted illusion designed to extract maximum value from your time, resources, and emotional investment. This false persona begins forming the moment she identifies you as a potential target. She studies your responses, preferences, and desires through seemingly casual conversations and social media stalking. She learns what type of woman attracts you, what values you hold important, and what emotional needs you're hoping to fulfill through a relationship. Then she begins crafting a personality that matches your ideal partner almost perfectly. If you value intelligence, she suddenly becomes fascinated by intellectual topics and starts sharing thoughtful articles and engaging in deep conversations. If you're attracted to femininity, she emphasizes her domestic interests and traditional values. If you're drawn to adventure, she develops a love for travel and outdoor activities. This isn't coincidence. It's calculated psychological manipulation designed to make you believe you found your soulmate. The persona extends beyond interests and values to encompass entire personality traits. She mirrors your communication style, adopts your humor, and even begins using your phrases and expressions. This creates a powerful psychological bond called the mirror effect, where you feel incredibly compatible because you're essentially falling in love with a reflection of yourself rather than a genuine individual with her own authentic personality. Sexual behavior becomes another tool in her persona arsenal. She presents herself as having the exact sexual interests, desires, and boundaries that match your preferences. If you value sexual enthusiasm, she becomes incredibly passionate and adventurous. If you prefer emotional intimacy, she emphasizes connection and romance. This false sexual persona is designed to create powerful bonding and make you believe you've found someone uniquely compatible with your deepest desires. The most insidious aspect is how this persona creates artificial scarcity. She presents traits and qualities that are rare and valuable, making you feel like you've won some kind of relationship lottery. You begin to believe that losing her means losing something irreplaceable, because the combination of traits she displays seems impossibly perfect and unlikely to be found elsewhere. But Jung understood that personas require enormous psychological energy to maintain, and eventually the real personality begins leaking through. You start noticing inconsistencies, contradictions, and moments where her authentic self emerges. She shows irritation when asked to engage with the interests she claimed to love. Her political views shift depending on the audience. Her sexual enthusiasm disappears once you're emotionally invested. These glimpses of authenticity are often dismissed or rationalized away because you're psychologically invested in the persona she created. Your brain works overtime to explain away the contradictions, blaming stress, circumstances, or temporary mood changes, rather than accepting that you've been interacting with a false personality designed to manipulate your emotions and decisions. The persona also serves as a form of psychological protection for her. By never revealing her authentic self, she avoids genuine vulnerability and intimacy while still receiving all the benefits of your emotional investment. You're loving and serving someone who doesn't actually exist, while her real personality remains safely hidden behind layers of calculated performance. As the relationship progresses and your investment increases, she begins allowing more of her authentic personality to emerge. This often creates cognitive dissonance as you struggle to reconcile the person you thought you knew with the reality now being revealed. The caring, supportive woman becomes critical and demanding. The intellectually curious person shows no genuine interest in learning or growth. The sexually enthusiastic partner becomes distant and uninterested. Jung recognized that this revelation of authentic personality often leads to what he called persona shock, the psychological trauma of realizing that someone you deeply cared for was essentially a fictional character. You begin questioning your judgment, your ability to read people, and your understanding of the entire relationship. The emotional investment you made based on the false persona feels wasted and betrayed. The most damaging aspect is how this experience affects your ability to trust future connections. Once you've been manipulated by an elaborate false persona, you become hyper-aware of potential deception in others, making it difficult to form genuine bonds with authentic people who aren't trying to manipulate you. You develop cynicism and suspicion that can poison healthy relationships. Recovery requires accepting that the person you fell for never actually existed. The love you felt was real, but it was directed toward a fictional character rather than a genuine human being. This isn't your fault. Skilled manipulators can fool even psychologically aware individuals by exploiting natural human desires for connection and compatibility. Moving forward means learning to identify persona versus authentic personality. You must become skilled at recognizing when someone's presentation feels too perfectly matched to your preferences, when their personality seems to shift based on circumstances, or when their actions consistently contradict their stated values and interests. Authentic people have flaws, limitations, and traits that don't perfectly align with your ideal partner, and this imperfection is actually a sign of genuineness rather than incompatibility. The collective unconscious. Why every woman repeats the same pattern. Perhaps the most disturbing discovery Jung made about human psychology was the existence of the collective unconscious, a shared psychic substrate that contains universal patterns of behavior inherited by all members of our species. Within this realm exist what he called archetypes, ancient behavioral templates that operate automatically across cultures, generations, and individual personalities. When it comes to how women interact with men, these archetypal patterns create an almost mechanical predictability that explains why your experiences with different women feel hauntingly similar. The feminine archetypal patterns related to male-female dynamics are ancient beyond imagination, carved into the human psyche through millions of years of evolutionary pressure. These patterns operated when our ancestors lived in caves, when civilizations rose and fell, and they continue operating today despite all our technological and social progress. They represent the deepest programming of feminine psychology, operating below conscious awareness and creating behaviors that feel instinctive and natural to women, even when they're destructive to relationships. One of the most powerful archetypes is what Jung identified as the eternal feminine, the pattern where women unconsciously view themselves as the prize to be won, rather than active participants in building mutual value. This archetype makes every woman, regardless of her individual personality or conscious beliefs, operate from the assumption that men should prove their worth through sacrifice, effort, and resources, while she remains relatively passive in the courtship process. You've experienced this archetype countless times without recognizing it. Every woman who expected you to plan dates, initiate conversations, solve relationship problems, and maintain romantic momentum while contributing minimal effort herself was operating from this ancient pattern. It doesn't matter if she's educated, successful, or claims to believe in equality. The archetype operates automatically, making her feel entitled to masculine effort while offering little in return. Another universal pattern is the testing archetype, the unconscious drive to constantly probe masculine boundaries and resolve through creating drama, conflict, and emotional challenges. This isn't conscious manipulation, it's an inherited behavioral program designed to identify weak men who would fail to protect and provide during times of crisis. Every woman you've known has engaged in this testing behavior, creating unnecessary problems to see how you respond under pressure. The collective nature of these patterns explains why women from completely different backgrounds, cultures, and personality types all seem to follow similar scripts in relationships. The shy, introverted woman and the bold, extroverted one both engage in the same boundary testing. The career-focused professional and the traditional homemaker both operate from the same entitlement to masculine resources and energy. Their individual personalities are just surface variations on deeper archetypal themes. Jung understood that these patterns exist because they once served evolutionary purposes. Women who successfully extracted resources from men while maintaining multiple options had better survival outcomes for themselves and their children. Women who could identify strong, committed men through testing behaviors were more likely to secure reliable partners. These behaviors became encoded into feminine psychology because they worked for thousands of generations. But what served our ancestors has become toxic in modern contexts where relationships are supposed to be based on mutual respect, equal contribution, and genuine partnership. The ancient archetypal patterns continue operating even though the survival pressures that created them no longer exist. Women unconsciously follow these inherited scripts while consciously believing they want modern, egalitarian relationships. This creates the maddening contradiction you've experienced repeatedly. Women who claim to want equality while expecting traditional masculine roles, who say they value emotional vulnerability while losing respect for men who show weakness, who demand independence while expecting men to solve their problems and manage their emotions. They're not being deliberately hypocritical. They're caught between conscious modern values and unconscious ancient programming. The collective unconscious also contains what Jung called the hypergamy archetype, the inherited drive to continuously seek higher status males regardless of current relationship satisfaction. This pattern made evolutionary sense when securing the highest status male meant survival advantages, but in modern contexts it creates chronic dissatisfaction and constant comparison with other potential partners. Every woman carries this archetypal pattern, which explains the universal female behavior of keeping options open, maintaining attention from multiple men, and constantly evaluating whether better opportunities exist. It doesn't matter how well you treat her or how successful you become. The archetype compels her to keep scanning for superior alternatives because this behavior was essential for survival in ancestral environments. The most frustrating aspect is how these patterns operate completely outside conscious control. A woman can genuinely believe she loves you, wants to commit to you, and appreciates your efforts while simultaneously engaging in archetypal behaviors that undermine the relationship. She's not lying or manipulating, she's experiencing the conflict between her conscious mind and her unconscious programming. Jung recognized that these archetypal patterns create what he called possession, states where individuals become completely controlled by unconscious forces and lose their individual agency. When a woman is possessed by the testing archetype, she cannot stop creating drama and conflict even when she consciously recognizes it's destroying her relationship. When possessed by the hypergamy archetype, she cannot stop comparing you to other men even when she logically knows you're a good partner. Understanding the collective unconscious nature of these patterns is both liberating and sobering. It's liberating because you realize these behaviors aren't personal attacks on your character or worth. They're ancient programs running automatically in feminine psychology. It's sobering because it means these patterns will appear in every woman you encounter, regardless of her individual qualities or conscious intentions. The key to dealing with archetypal patterns is recognizing them as impersonal forces rather than individual choices. When she engages in testing behavior, you don't take it personally or try to eliminate it completely. You understand it as an ancient program and respond appropriately without emotional reactivity. When she shows signs of hypergamous scanning, you don't become insecure or try to compete with phantom rivals. You maintain your own value and standards regardless of her unconscious programming. Breaking free from the negative effects of these patterns requires developing what Jung called consciousness, the ability to recognize archetypal forces and choose how to respond rather than reacting automatically. You cannot change the fact that these patterns exist in feminine psychology, but you can choose not to be controlled by them or sacrifice your own well-being to appease them.